People roamed freely. Now roams only death.
So, I played Blood West. Let me tell you about it. Personally, I actually like being able to make comparisons from one game to another. That's how genres are made, after all. More importantly though, comparisons like that can also demonstrate certain qualities someone might like in a game. All this is to say that Blood West has a lot of the good qualities that the Stalker series has. Imagine, if you will, for a moment, you wake up in a duster, completely amnesiac, no idea what happened before this moment, and a goat skull on a stick with glowing eyes is talking to you, telling you this land is cursed, conveying that just about anything that moves is not only going to try to kill you, but also going to be quite proficient at it.
Before you ask, no, we cannot send you back. Not yet. See, that's the nature of every summoning. It must have a reason.
But that isn't all. Oh no. Not even death is going to release you from this limbo, since you are undead, and you'll be getting back up should your mortal coil be severed. That's right, you got the extended warranty, so you'll just be stacking up the curses instead. Then it tells you that the only way out of this place is to run around it for a while, collecting the very cursed treasures that made them this way, all the while dealing with all these lethal abominations. And yes, abominations is right. These monsters are quite heavily inspired by Lovecraft and maybe a little Cronenberg. This is going to lead to the main cycle of the game itself. The flow state of Blood West doesn't necessarily change throughout the game, but evolves. In the first act, it's about stalking your enemies, snaking through the environment, scavenging everything you can use to further your goals. One thing that it doesn't change is the sense of exploration. In fact, most of the time you can find and acquire the things you'll need long before they become relevant. To help you accomplish this, there's an array of tools at your disposal. Maybe the most important are things called artifacts. If we are to make the comparison to Stalker, it's quite significantly like those artifacts. You have 3 slots, and a vast array of different items with different effects to slot in there how you see fit. And that's a large part of determining a build. You have the choice of what weapons to use, what items to equip, and what artifacts to use, as well as where you have allocated skill points. Yes, there is an experience metric and levels in which you can allocate 3 skill points per level into a variety of skills, most of which are passive buffs, but can actually be impactful enough to make heavy differences in playstyle. Anyway, after a short tutorial, the first thing you encounter is a small safe zone with another bone totem. You know, the thing with the skull and the stick, and the guy who brought your carcass back. These kinds of safe zones are scattered throughout the game, and each one you'll be able to trade supplies with at least one survivor and catch the latest gossip about your current whereabouts. From that very point, the entire game opens up wide. Take a moment to appreciate the visual aesthetic of the place. There are some very low-res textures, but they're being used so well here. Everything you look at is clean and easily digestible. In fact, everything goes cohesively into this less is more style, and usually this causes something to feel video gamey, which in my opinion is a good thing, but here there's more to it than that. Everything appears to belong just right in a world that's both familiar and foreign simultaneously. Before you go on your big adventure, you'll be informed that you can rest at safe zones like the one you're in at the moment. But beware, because doing so will cause some enemies to just get right back up and start prowling again. I'll tell you right now, it's just a roll of the dice, a random chance that any or every enemy is going to respawn when you rest. On the bright side, you could theoretically prevent yourself from being soft-locked if you can find some enemies that you can take out and loot without spending too much resources, but that's unlikely to be a problem. If you're running out of a particular resource, there's always another option, like running out of bullets may lead you to using a bow and retrieving the arrows, or sneaking around and backstabbing. For the most part, consider that concept as a failsafe. The central idea is that if you choose to rest, areas that were previously made safe by your actions may be hostile again. Now, as for the looting I was mentioning, Blood West has a loot system based on a grid and fitting all kinds of things into it. Everything takes up space. Guns, ammo, treasure, items, artifacts, everything but cold hard cash. Exploring for any length of time could see your pockets overflowing, and fast. In my playthrough, I was always on the lookout for great places to stash hordes of loot and spend a bit of time just hauling stuff to sell. At first, anyway. I can never have enough ammo. There's no such thing as enough. Yeah, I was buying all the ammo every time I entered a camp and stashing it, buying every expensive weapon and artifact, literally collecting everything, and barely used most of it. You really don't need to be OCD about the loot. You'll probably be perfectly fine, and if you do run out of everything, work on your sneaking skills. The pressure of supplies is actually most emphasized in the first act. Just use a bow and retrieve as many arrows as you can. Aim for the head. It matters. Won't be long before there's a comfortable groove with the combat, supplies, and inventory management. That isn't to say that the game is easy though, just that there are many ways to go into a situation prepared. Don't try to wander into a mess and expect to improvise your way out of it. This is actually one of Blood West's biggest strengths. Every enemy is extremely lethal in the wrong circumstances, and the player is extremely lethal in the right ones. It's like when someone tells you to choose your battles, but this time you're listening. This is hostile enemy territory. You are outnumbered. Every corner can be another passageway with an enemy waiting, ready to slap you so hard. See, you will know when an enemy is detecting you, which sense they're using to do it, and how well they're doing it. But, at least on a first playthrough, you won't be prepared for rounding corners and snaking through tunnels. The game's other biggest strength is the map design. There's a ridiculously dense map for each act with the kind of points of interest that lead off in branching paths that also lead off in all kinds of directions. Double back on themselves, offer shortcuts, dead ends, and long ways around. Just about every single thing on the map is at least 3 times bigger than anyone's going to realistically expect seeing it for the first time. You never know when your actions are going to alert some enemy you weren't aware of, and when that does happen, where they're coming from. Most of the areas in the game are completely optional, and there's usually a good reason to explore. I visited everything I could. Hell, a few times I tried to take a quick jaunt down what should have been a short dead end to find something like a 5-floor underground cavern system. Other times, a seamless lead-in from one area to another, teasing me forward, or a new monster causing me to quickly reassess my strategies. It's just that every area turned out to be a breath of fresh air from the last, and a surprise. Spoil us more, self-published developer Hyperstrange. There's very little hand-holding, and practically zero railroading. Each act has something that has to be done for progress, and NPCs can nudge you in the right direction for the next step, but these steps can mostly be taken out of order and at your own pace. And that's pretty cool too. Some of your safe zones have other survivors with insight or supplies to trade, and often will trade useful information for sending you on an errand, but you won't find them out in the wild often because, unlike you, they don't have the extended warranty and they don't want to die. I'm one of those people that sometimes just avoids the thing I'm supposed to do just to explore all kinds of side content. This had some interesting consequences here. Some of my goals I learned about in a different way than the straightforward path would provide. Some goals I accidentally accomplished, and some things changed due to my sheer proactiveness, something I tend to lack elsewhere. I spent the majority of the first act relying on a bow and surprise attacks in order to quickly and quietly dispatch enemies, and saving guns and ammo for the dicier situations. Most of the enemies here can be taken out with a single headshot, but chances are, if they're melee enemies, they'll outrun you if you make a mistake. Or if they're ranged enemies, they're likely to make it harder for you to hit them. Or a few types in particular using shotguns to make it easier for them to hit you. Every nook and cranny is worth exploring. Every shelf, barrel, corner, crack, and crevice may be hiding an item, or may be completely bare, or a pathway to a hidden spot, maybe an alternate route to ambush the locals. It's not just that there's stuff everywhere, no. The only one here what belongs on an episode of Hoarders is me, but the point is that it's always worth it to be thorough. Each of these expanding areas in Act 1 has a treasure, a relic that's waiting for you to uncover and collect it. You don't need all of them. I don't even think you need half of them to proceed to the next act. You just wind up near one when exploring an area, and the screen will darken, and you'll start to hear strange sounds, maybe voices. It's all dramatic and has presence. Snatch that bitch up and take it back to the Bone Totem. One thing about these relics too is that each one has a little story that the Bone Totem will tell you about. Also, there's a neat reward for collecting all of them, not just lore. I want to point out one thing about stealth real quick. The enemies do have different capacities for noticing you with different senses, but what's neat is that they notice each other too. If you pick one off and nobody sees you do it, but they witness their friend fall, they'll go check the body and then start looking for you. This is another way to gain a tactical advantage in a situation, really. If you have a clean shot on an enemy, take said shot and another enemy in the immediate vicinity goes to check. Well, that just leaves you another clean shot. Just be careful that it doesn't lead you to getting caught. For instance, there's a fort. Don't worry, this is still all early on. That could be a complete problem if handled wrong. There's a copious amount of enemies, and without an escape plan, for when the defecation hits the oscillation, I would have been Swiss cheesed. I solved that problem by systematically assassinating enemies patrolling the perimeter on the high ground so that when I eventually did kick the nest, I could skip across the top of the wall and scatter the bulk of the group based on how fast they could chase me. So many times, positioning and situational awareness are really the absolute best tools in the kit. Pay attention, have a plan, succeed. You find yourself surprised, you find yourself hurt. There's a raw sense of fairness conveyed through the difficulty. Death can come fast for anyone here in the Cursed Land, which is why preparation is so important. But each enemy type is quite distinct, so your first encounter or two with each one is going to be something you'll need to be taking notes on. It's not long before the luxury of encountering them alone is gone. Don't start panicking. If you're really dreading a particular enemy type, there are notes scattered around the Cursed Lands by someone who's dealt with them before. And I'm pretty sure there's an insightful breakdown for each individual enemy type. You just have to find it. Alright, so ahead of this there are going to be some spoilers, some major ones. I'm not going to discuss like everything about the story or anything, but definitely the gameplay and the evolution thereof and the major key points. If you want the full experience blind but still want to get a cohesive idea of what's going on here, timestamp. Okay, cool. So Act 1 hooked me, and it's the weakest act of the game. The goal is to dig up and find a bunch of cursed treasures. You get pointers to find at least the minimum requirement. However, most points of interest have one in them, and they're not hard to find or anything. The reward waiting for you finding all of them is a bit of a hint on how to basically alter the fight with the boss. Firstly, it's a tree, but like an evil tree, right? Anyway, there's a secret path you can take to crawl around the root system and bust a bunch of weak points on the roots in order to significantly reduce the amount of health the boss has before you even start the fight. The actual fight itself takes place in an arena where the tree uses some of its many roots to try to attack the player in patterned attacks such as spikes up from the ground. The fight isn't terrible, and there are other mechanics when it tries to protect itself, causing the need to bust some other weak points as they arise in order to soften up the trunk, in preparation for receiving more ass whip. As a whole though, this is the weakest boss fight of the whole game, from a design standpoint. That ends with a cutscene explaining some things and foreshadowing other things, and it's all done kind of anecdotally through a telling of a story from the Bible. During the process, the Bone Totem summons the undead monstrosity of the player character to another, less pleasant vista, a swamp. You wake up in a hole in the ground. You, the Bone Totem, and an as of now unnamed masked woman with a double barrel. Yup. So Annabelle, as she goes by, asks you to find a couple of normal-ass people stranded out in this hellish landscape. So I did the sensible thing and set out to ransack the locals instead after buying a nice little pistol from her that pays you for headshots. And since headshots are significantly important, this little tool set out to pay for itself. Pay for itself it did. There's a town just to the west of the safety zone you enter in on. I paid them a visit first, got acquainted with some of the new enemy types, especially these ones that not only carry a double barrel, but Molotovs. And man, are they quick to invite you to a barbecue. Now, Act 2 is a lot more dangerous than Act 1, but the trade-off is that ammo is a lot more plentiful and that combat is a lot more expected. All of the same rules from before apply, just in larger quantities. In fact, I feel like the flow state takes a shift in each act, and Act 2 evolves to feel more like a guns-blazing retribution against the horrors of the Cursed Land. There will be blood, and this time you're not the underprepared scavenger. Yes, the environment and the enemies have bumped up in number and aggression, but Act 2 is the arc of empowerment. You're here, it's mutually understood as a fight now, and you're taking it to them. Understanding your enemies becomes even more important here, though, in the swamp. You may be a lot more prepared to deal with them, sure, but they're also significantly more deadly in increasingly distinct ways. Great way to call them dicks. The enemies packing guns are packing bigger guns. The fast-moving melee enemies have more categories now, some of which can close the distance on you incredibly fast in the right circumstances, while others have integrated ranged attacks into the repertoire. You even start to see someone else's failed attempts to learn more, giving you quite the opportune time to pick up something new on them. Weapons, guns, it's all scattered around. This time there's a lot more to find in comparison to the canyon, and most of it is objectively better than any counterpart it may or may not have had from Act 1. Including cursed weapons, like this one, this double barrel that, in my opinion, was worth it because it reloads faster. Yeah, it scratches the itch. The bump in reload speed seemed small just by looking at the stats, but really, it changed things so dynamically that I could accomplish a hell of a lot more with that very little bit of time it saved me, because I'd have the next shell ready just in time. Oh right, it was cursed too, which means that you can't take it off without a special item, or dying, which causes your body to take curses that translate into negative status effects and again can only be removed under specific circumstances. It's not that harrowing to try and get something removed though. The actual goals you have in your time in the swamp are much more rich than the canyon. Instead of digging up random treasure, you've got tangible goals now. The first of which is to save a couple of people, a priest stranded in hostile territory, but let's be real, it's all hostile territory, and to find a little girl and return her to safety as well. Then, parts of a previous undead hero must be located, excavated, and returned, and assembled to round out the ragtag group of survivors that inhabit the camp, and each of them has a role to play in how the rest of the act shakes out. The actual overarching goal is the same. There's a big-ass demonic monster that's in dire need of some slaying. There's also roadblocks, because reasons, that get you meandering around the map before you do that. Again, each area is unique and rich. This time, however, the roadblocks are so much more worth it. Like, I don't think it came across as weak back in the canyon, but in comparison it really does. You can see the vision really coming together here. The little girl knows a lot about the surrounding area. She's your go-to for the least amount of things. The priest has all kinds of restoratives and has been doing his research on how to cure the disease that both he and Annabelle suffer from. The undead is capable of performing the ritual that can make the terrible beast of the land vulnerable, and killing that thing is what you're actually here for. And then there's Annabelle. She's been supplying you this whole time in the swamp. Now, we're not done quite yet. The priest tasks you with finding the remaining cure for the disease.
My mortal flesh is being consumed by a terrible illness. But there's hope even in such a dark place and dark circumstances.
And there's a caveat. There's one dose. You have 2 patients. To make matters more interesting, there's quite a depthy backstory to both of them, told in completely different ways. Annabelle is a southern country girl, and she would rather just sit you down and tell you her story herself. That she will do if you let her.
In my spare time, I was taking care of a small garden. Weren't anything special, but I liked growing flowers and herbs. Nothing like watching the dusk unfold before your eyes, the smell of blooming roses all around, with a cup of tea in hand, enhanced with peppermint you grew yourself.
The priest is from a very different part of the world. English isn't his first language, and in a neat touch, that comes across in the voice acting too. However, you learn about him through notes and documents left by his research team that came with him to the area, only having the equivalent of disgruntled employee notes to go on. You have a choice, and the clock is ticking on both of them. Someone isn't going to make it. We are not done yet. Oh no. We still need to carve the soul out of the beast. In order to do that, we're going to need to put together the ingredients that the undead needs to perform the ritual. Now, by this point, if you've been exploring like I have, then most, if not all of these ingredients are either sitting in your back pocket or your stash. I didn't have to go everywhere for this one, but I did have one place that I had to visit that I hadn't done yet. These caverns that we're camped out in are interwoven with the root system of a massive tree. When we collect everything we need for the ritual, the safe zone is the perfect place to perform it. Instead of fighting a massive stationary tree this time, there's a behemoth marching around the perimeter of the safe zone, waiting for you to pop your head out one of these exit tunnels. It is, for all intents and purposes, invincible. The ritual gave you a method to change that. While you're out gathering the rest of the ingredients, the undead puts up pyres in the path of the thing. These are designed for you to hit with flame rounds and ignite, causing purple cursed smoke to arise. Should the behemoth walk through this, he'll become vulnerable and you'll be able to damage it. The way it attacks is spread fire quills that can be difficult to evade if you're not prepared at the right moment to move out of the way. But should you need to take a moment to recoup, it's actually pretty easy to find some cover to bandage up and take a smoke break. After a lengthy fight, we finally revoke this behemoth's license to exist. Now, the only thing that makes sense to the undead is to leave while the bone totem is distracted with this success. It's almost like he thinks the bone totem has not been on your side this whole time, the thing that's been bringing you back to life and making you do stuff. Who knows? He might be right. Fuck it, let's go. The only problem is the environment seems to be against you as well. The player even winds up dead in the cutscene between acts, with the undead bringing him back to life. It's all in service to get away from the totem of souls, that bone totem. What's the first thing he says we need when we arrive?
I admit it reluctantly, but we need a totem of souls. Either we summon it here, or our future doesn't look so bright.
This time you have goals, much like in the swamp, scattered around the map and can direct you down a path, while most things can simply be done out of order. This time, however, there are multi-part goals. For instance, you will need to find another NPC, collect ingredients for him, and have him make you the demonic equivalent of a gas mask before you can go down into this giant chasm in the middle of town. Objectives and goals are not the only thing to evolve here, by the way. The secrets, the enemies, the objectives, the plot, it all evolves here, and everything becomes multifaceted. This act, The Mountain, is Blood West at its absolute best and most complex. Every enemy that's introduced here has at least one extra component to consider when engaging in combat. For instance, there's these shambling zombies that are just begging to be headshot. Now, if you do that, of course, it conserves ammo and removes them from the picture. However, when you do that, you release what's called a hellbat out of their head. It's a giant leech with wings and it will go straight for you. I really hope you're not distracted by anything else in this moment, because if that bat connects, it's going to face hug you and you'll need to spend a few precious moments dislodging it from your sinuses before you can do anything, let alone even just see the other enemies that are bearing down on you. That's literally the first new enemy. There are new quick ones with claws that spew forth clouds of toxic gases. There's boo hags, as they're called, 8-foot-tall skinless witches that at range will spread fire spiky fingernails at you, but given the chance can and will outrun you and attempt to steal your skin, but can only be hurt by fire or gold. Then there's these demons that turn invisible and stalk you. Those are incredibly dangerous. It really is an all-star cast at times in this act. The flow state has shifted again, and this is not a power trip anymore. This isn't a fair and equally understood fight anymore. This is the cursed land of Blood West bringing its A-game and putting you into the role of prey. No longer are you scavenging for supplies or MacGyvering your situation into one of success. No longer are you kicking in doors and utilizing the art of the guns blazing approach. Now you're careful or you're dead. Now you're seizing every opportunity for a surprise attack, and it is a fight for survival against the sheer deadliness of the enemies. There isn't so much a shortage of supplies anymore. I stopped carrying loot and just focused on supplies. Most things are in ample supply, including the enemies. The mountain has the most densely populated map too, in terms of structures, points of interest, and enemies. It allows you to really open up on them, provided you're careful not to miss or mess up. Plenty of loot, lots of unique weapons. It was really great for the devs to build the map this way. Everything you've built up to this point, from playstyle to character build, you really get to go wild with, and it'll test your skill in using it all too. The tasks laid out in front of you for this act take you to places with clear environmental storytelling to show you that this is some kind of ancient burial ground for the natives, and the spirits are pissed. In fact, you practically are tasked with desecrating just about everything they have going on here as just a part of the overarching goal. And, mind you, the undead did tell you that you'll need a new bone totem, a very native thing to have. Also like the guy who brought you to one. If you really squint at it, there's this underlying "are we the baddies" vibe veiled under the surface. The main focus is to find ways to enter areas forbidden to you, and then take an artifact of jade carved into an animal shape from places scattered around the mountainside, as well as to find some spiritually focused items to make this bone totem with. The statuettes are then used to open up a door to lead you to the top of the mountain where the bone totem is to be created. No better place to erect a bone totem than the highest peak of the tallest mountain. The difference is, we don't make a bone totem. We summon the biggest demon yet, and it invites us to a front row seat of the showing of how its digestive tract works. This is the final boss of Blood West, and it's a worthy adversary compared to the rest. It will take a long time and a lot of ammunition to kill, and it's incredibly dangerous, with more and more moves being added to its repertoire the lower its health gets. Your job is easy. Shoot it in the face. Don't get hit. The don't get hit part is where it gets increasingly complicated. The fight consists of phases in which the more health the boss loses, the more attacks it uses, including summoning more and more high-tier minions. The same kind you've already fought on the mountainside by this point. Some red-headed demons draped in rags that pull a doom revenant on you and spawn flaming skulls to toss at you that not only explode but are also homing. That's awesome in a place with zero cover. Kill them, and fast, every time. The fire breath can be easy enough to avoid, but mixed in with all of this is a hail of explosives from above. When you need to patch up, be very careful of the pop rocks raining in. Once this beast is finally slain, you get to learn a whole lot of things about it. For starters, it really is a totem of souls, only it's active. In fact, all of them are these monsters, and you'll do their bidding and like it, because you can't even die. They just bring you back anyway. So very Lovecraftian ending. You'll be a slave to a cosmic force until the sun blows up.
As you wander aimlessly until the end of days, you will realize all you achieved was in vain. You will witness the spread of the curse and the end of the civilization of man.
So, in the grand scheme of things, Blood West is an open-world kind of first-person shooter. It's got a grid-based inventory system that you'll be constantly managing, and combat that rewards stealth and favors planning ahead. Mechanically, everything is sound. I don't recall ever having any technical hiccups or anything. In fact, there's a bit of a hidden mechanic that can actually be used to some great effect, and I'm not sure if it's a bug or not, but I think it's cool nonetheless. If you take aim at something, your accuracy is absolutely precise. This tight aiming actually occurs at the moment you begin aiming, not the moment the sights are lined up. Using this and being aware of the crosshair, it's actually extremely effective to just snap fire by lining up the shot and firing the moment you start aiming. The benefit is kind of twofold, because if you actually hold the aim for just a moment, it will start to sway. This means that the most accurate you can possibly be is to fire as you draw. It's just a very cowboy feel to it, I think. The enemies that you'll be encountering will consistently challenge you with not only their individual complexity increasing as the game progresses, but the combinations used to populate the areas are going to be unique to each individual point of interest. The handcrafted nature of each encounter is going to present a very fine-tuned encounter in each combat scenario. For that, you'll be learning how to handle each enemy differently, and more importantly, how to prioritize each threat based on various other factors. It's not that everything only fits one way either. The developers are giving you an entire toolbox for you to decide what you like to use best, as well as presenting an array of situations in which to use those tools. Your personal strengths and playstyle will directly affect what situations will be easier and which ones are going to try to break you. Again, nothing is inherently invalid, and that's really badass. To coincide with this, a build consists of 2 weapons, one of which is limited to a smaller size, 3 consumable items, and 3 artifacts that contain passive modifiers to the playstyle. Some weapons or artifacts are exceedingly rare or unique and contain equally unique properties, really delivering on an excitement to exploring and plundering. There's no shortage of interesting and unique weapons, especially. The combat is quick, decisive, unforgiving. Every victory you achieve is going to be one you earned, whether it be through proper planning or excellent course correction, and occasionally just sheer panic and grit. Kinda like life, but if planning worked well. The art style, well, you can see it, is very pixelated and chunky. It serves its purpose very well, and personally I love the style used here, but I'm willing to admit that it's not going to be for everyone. I would really urge you to look past that if that's what's holding you back though. The style bleeds over into the audio as well. Nothing is extremely complex as far as the sounds go, but the sound effects are very clean and you can tell exactly what's going on based on what you can hear. I love this, and I think it's more prevalent in older games than more recent ones these days, but clean audio cues are so incredible for developing an ongoing communication basis with the player. Okay, so to be fair and critical, I have to say that the enemies are designed in a way that their senses are so much more dull than it seems like they should be. More often than not, stealth is an exceedingly viable option. It takes a lot to be seen or heard until you open fire. I'm not saying it's easy, but it is incredibly noticeable. I also want to point out that the game opens on the weakest act. Like, so much is going on in both Act 2 and 3, from both a mechanical and lore perspective. The first act is really bare in comparison. Sure, the first act hooked me in, but before diving back in, I'm likely to consider the fact that the opening segment is really a slow burn to get to all the good stuff. I think I also would have liked to see a bit more balance with ammo types. Most guns have different ammo types, but one clearly outclasses everything else. I think it would have been a lot better to have, especially in a game like this, each ammo type be more useful in specific circumstances. Silver ammo does triple damage on ghosts, which aren't very common, but gold ammo does double damage on everything, and even more than silver on what's probably the most dangerous normal ghost enemy. Fire ammo does damage over time, but gold ammo just does that kind of damage up front and right away. I just wish gold ammo wasn't the best answer every time. In conclusion, was Blood West worth it? Fuck yes. Stalker fan? Play this. Wanted to like Stalker but couldn't get past the jank? Blood West is here for you. Don't know what any of that is, but this looked cool? You belong here too. Come on, get lost in the cursed land for a bit. I doubt you'll regret it. Personally, I love this. Blood West is not the kind of game someone can just come in and make, and that's been proven over the years. It really takes someone with the dedication and passion to bring this kind of game to life in this way. tension, survival, determination, all boiled together in this game, and it is challenging you to just test it. The rock-solid combat and uncaring world are just the beginning. If you've made it this far, thank you. I love talking about the latest banger of a game I've played recently, and you've just made it worth it. On that note, I'm out.